In a dusty Texas roadhouse, a quiet old man was about to be provoked. What began as a rowdy night of drinking and pool turned deadly serious when an arrogant entourage of fighters stormed the bar, led by the new MMA champion itching for a spectacle. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical customer. For decades, he had been a martial arts master, special forces veteran, and action legend, known worldwide for his precision, discipline, and ability to end fights before they began. When Tyler the Titan Kane threw down his challenge, he had no idea he was inviting humiliation at the hands of a man who lived and breathed mastery. Chuck didn't rise with bravado, he rose with the quiet inevitability of a storm. With a single, precise response, he would ignite a confrontation that rippled far beyond the barroom walls. What began as a drunken display of ego would become a viral legend. Rosa's Roadhouse would never be the same after one fighter learned, in 3 unforgettable seconds, the difference between looking strong and being strong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The neon sign outside Rosa's Roadhouse flickered against the black Texas sky, casting red and blue shadows that danced across the gravel parking lot. Pickup trucks and dusty sedans huddled together under the vast canopy of stars, their metal skin cooling in the midnight breeze. Inside, country music hummed low from an ancient jukebox, just audible beneath the gentle click of pool balls and the murmur of late-night conversations. Rosa Delgado wiped down the bar counter with practiced efficiency, her weathered hands moving in swift, circular motions. 27 years of owning this place had taught her to read a room better than most people read books. Tonight felt ordinary enough, a Thursday in September, when the heat finally released its grip on the Texas plains, and people could breathe again. Her regulars occupied their usual spots. Old Joe and his Vietnam buddies hunched over the pool table in the corner. A handful of truckers nursing beers at scattered tables, and a few couples swaying lazily to George Strait's crooning about Texas. At the far end of the bar sat a man alone, his presence so unassuming that most patrons hadn't even noticed him. Chuck Norris wasn't trying to hide, he simply existed without demanding attention. Dressed in a plain button-down shirt and jeans, he sat with perfect posture, sipping tea from a mug Rosa had filled 20 minutes ago. No whiskey, no beer, just tea. His eyes, alert but relaxed, occasionally scanned the room with quiet interest. "Need a refill, Chuck?" Rosa asked, her voice low enough that only he could hear. He smiled, a genuine smile that creased the corners of his eyes, and nodded once. "Thank you, Rosa. How's Miguel's knee doing?" "Better since he took your advice about those stretches." Doctor was surprised how fast he recovered. She poured hot water over a fresh tea bag. "You're the only famous person I know who remembers people's names and their problems." Chuck's smile deepened slightly as he wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "Not famous, just been around a while." Rosa was about to respond when the front door burst open, slamming against the wall hard enough to rattle the framed photos of local rodeo champions. The music seemed to falter as heads turned toward the commotion. 5 men entered, or rather, 4 men followed, as one strutted in ahead of them. The leader wore designer jeans and a tight black t-shirt that showcased arms covered in elaborate tattoos. His buzzed hair emphasized a square jaw and the kind of muscular neck that didn't come from ordinary work. A fresh bruise bloomed alongside his right eyebrow, partially hidden under a butterfly bandage. Tyler the Titan Kane had arrived, fresh off his televised UFC victory. His entourage, 2 hulking men who might have been fighters themselves, and 2 slicker types with expensive watches, trailed him like planets orbiting their Sunday. "Somebody tell me why we're in this dump instead of VIP at Eclipse," one of the slick men complained, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Because," Tyler announced, spreading his arms wide, I grew up in places like this. And now that I'm champion, I want everyone to see what a real fighter looks like." His voice carried a practiced performative quality. As if invisible cameras were still rolling, Rosa's expression hardened. "Welcome to the Roadhouse. Keep it civil. And you can stay." Tyler's attention swiveled to her, his lips curling into something between a smile and a sneer. "Yes, ma'am," he drawled with exaggerated politeness that bordered on mockery. Then he turned to survey his audience. Old Joe and his friends had paused their game, pool cues held motionless as they assessed the newcomers with the wary expressions of men who'd seen enough trouble to recognize its approach. Joe's eyes narrowed, the wrinkles around them deepening with disapproval. "What are you looking at, Grandpa?" Tyler called out. "Never seen a real champion before?" One of Tyler's entourage, a thick-necked man with a buzz cut, laughed too loudly. "Maybe they need a demonstration, thank you." Old Joe didn't respond. He simply turned back to the pool table, lining up his shot with deliberate focus. "That's right," Tyler snickered. "Mind your own business." The young bartender, Mariah, caught Rosa's eye and raised an eyebrow. Rosa gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent command to stay calm and keep serving. "First round's on me," Tyler announced to his crew as they claimed a large table near the center of the room. "Hell, first round's on me for everybody." He pulled out a thick money clip and peeled off several $100 bills, slapping them on the bar counter. "That cover it, sweetheart." Mariah's smile didn't reach her eyes as she collected the cash. "I'll bring your drinks over." "What can I get you?" "Top shelf everything," Tyler replied, then turned away without waiting for a response, already scanning the room for reactions to his generosity. Some of the truckers raised their glasses in appreciation, but most of the regulars kept to themselves, their conversations resuming at a lower volume. The atmosphere had shifted, tightened somehow, like the air before a storm. Rosa glanced down the bar at Chuck, who hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, watching the scene unfold with an expression that revealed nothing. His tea remained untouched, steam rising in delicate wisps that dissolved into the hazy air. Tyler, meanwhile, had begun to pace around the room like a circus ringmaster, retelling the details of his victory to anyone who would listen, and even those who wouldn't. "Third round, he thought he had me cornered," Tyler boasted, miming the fight moves. "But I've been working on this new combo: feint left, drop the shoulder, then boom." He threw a shadow uppercut that whistled through the air. Caught him right under the chin. Lights out. A few patrons nodded politely. One of the truckers, younger than the rest, seemed genuinely impressed, asking questions about the technique. Encouraged, Tyler continued his performance, moving from table to table. When he reached the pool players, Old Joe was bent over the table, lining up a difficult bank shot. "Nice shot, Pops," Tyler said, bumping against the table just as Joe struck the cue ball. The shot went wide. Joe straightened slowly, his weathered face impassive as he turned to face the fighter. For a moment, tension crackled between them. "You know," Joe said quietly, "back in Nam, we had a saying about men who needed to make noise to feel important." Tyler's eyes narrowed. "Yeah? What's that?" "That they're usually the first to fall." Joe's voice was low but steady, his eyes unflinching. A tense silence followed, broken only when one of Tyler's entourage stepped forward. "You threatening the champ, old man?" Joe didn't blink. "Just sharing some wisdom, free of charge." Tyler stared for a moment longer, then broke into exaggerated laughter. "Wisdom? That's cute." He turned to his companions. "Hear that? We got a philosopher in here." He snatched a pool cue from the rack and pushed between two of Joe's friends. "Let me show you how it's done, Grandpa. In the octagon, or at the pool table, I'm still the champion." As he bent over the table, performing an elaborate warm-up ritual that involved twirling the cue like a baton. Old Joe stepped back, shaking his head slightly. "He's barking up the wrong tree tonight," Joe muttered to his friend, casting a meaningful glance toward the bar. At the counter, Chuck remained still, his eyes now fixed on his tea. But something in his posture had changed, an almost imperceptible straightening of the spine, a slight shift in the set of his shoulders. Not tension exactly, but readiness. Rosa moved down the bar toward him, refilling his hot water without being asked. "Chuck," she said softly, "I can handle this. You don't need to get involved." Chuck looked up at her, his expression gentle. "I know you can, Rosa." His voice was quiet but clear, like still water running deep. "I'm just enjoying my tea." But both of them knew that peace had a time limit. The clock was ticking down with each boisterous laugh, each demonstration of Tyler's prowess. Each moment the young champion dominated the space with his presence. The storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived, and in the eye of that storm sat Chuck Norris, calm and motionless, like a mountain that had weathered 1,000 tempests and would remain standing long after this one passed. Tyler, the Titan Kane, dominated the pool table with the same aggressive flourish he brought to the octagon. Each shot was a performance less about precision than power, less about the game than proving his superiority. His entourage cheered every successful hit as though it were a knockout blow, their voices growing louder as whiskey loosened their restraint. "8-ball, corner pocket," Tyler announced. Though it was a simple shot that required no called prediction, he struck the cue ball with unnecessary force. The black 8-ball rocketed into the pocket with a violent clack, while the cue ball nearly leapt off the table. One of his crew caught it mid-air with a whoop of celebration. "And that," Tyler proclaimed to Old Joe and his friends, who had retreated to a nearby table, "is how champions play." Old Joe sipped his beer without comment, his eyes revealing nothing. Tyler, unsatisfied with the subdued reaction, scanned the room for better audience engagement. The Roadhouse had grown more crowded in the past half hour. Word had spread that the new MMA champion was making an appearance, drawing in curious locals and a few eager fans. Some asked for pictures, which Tyler granted with theatrical magnanimity, flexing and posing as smartphone flashes lit up the dim bar. "Another round for the house," he called to Mariah, who acknowledged the order with a tight nod. As she worked behind the bar, Mariah leaned closer to Rosa. "How long are we going to let this circus continue?" Rosa's eyes flicked toward the end of the bar, where Chuck still sat, now focused on a book he'd pulled from his jacket pocket. The spine was worn smooth, the cover folded back to mark his place. "As long as he stays civil," Rosa answered. "Champion or not, his money spends just like anybody else's." "Civil's a stretch," Mariah muttered, pouring whiskey into a line of shot glasses. "You know he made Diane cry? Asked her if the fighters on TV made her husband feel inadequate." Rosa's eyes hardened. "I didn't hear that. She didn't want to make a scene. Left through the back." Rosa nodded once, filing the information away. "Keep an eye on him. First line he crosses, he's out." But Tyler was already moving on to his next conquest. Having dominated the pool table and posed for photos, he now approached the jukebox, scrolling through selections with exaggerated consideration. "What do real Texans listen to these days?" he called out to no one in particular. "This music sounds like my grandpa's funeral." He selected a pounding hip-hop track that thundered through the Roadhouse speakers, drowning out conversations and turning heads. The regular patrons exchanged glances, some annoyed, others resigned. "That's more like it," Tyler shouted over the bass. He began to move to the beat, performing an impromptu shadowboxing routine in the small space near the jukebox. His entourage formed a semicircle around him, clapping and encouraging each elaborate combination of punches and kicks that came dangerously close to nearby tables. A middle-aged couple abandoned their table, slipping cash under their half-finished drinks and heading for the door. Tyler noticed. "Where you going?" "Night's just getting started," he called after them. But they didn't turn around. Tyler's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty, the first crack in his performer's mask, before hardening into dismissal. "Their loss," he announced to his remaining audience. It was then, in the middle of his performance, that Tyler's roving gaze finally landed on the solitary figure at the end of the bar. Something about the man's stillness amidst the chaos caught his attention. The way he sat, unperturbed by the pounding music. The way he turned a page in his small book with unhurried precision. Tyler's movements slowed. He squinted through the dim light, recognition dawning across his features. "No way," he said, loud enough for his entourage to hear. "No fucking way." His crew followed his gaze, confusion giving way to widened eyes and nudges. "Is that?" "I think it is." Tyler's expression transformed surprise, melting into the calculating look of a predator spotting an opportunity. His smile stretched wide, revealing perfect white teeth. "Cut the music," he ordered. One of his men hurried to the jukebox, and the thundering bass abruptly died, leaving a ringing silence. In that silence, every head turned toward Tyler, who now stood in the center of the roadhouse, arms spread wide like a ringmaster commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I just realized we have a celebrity in our midst." The atmosphere tightened as patrons looked around, confused. Chuck turned another page in his book, seemingly oblivious. "The man, the myth, the legend," Tyler continued, his tone dripping with theatrical mockery. "Mr. Chuck Norris himself, gracing our humble establishment." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd as heads swiveled toward the bar. Chuck looked up from his book, his expression neutral, as he met Tyler's gaze across the room. He didn't speak, didn't react, just regarded the younger man with calm, steady eyes. "Chuck Norris," Tyler repeated, savoring the name as he began to move toward the bar. "Walker, Texas Ranger. Action star extraordinaire. At least, that's what you were. What, 20 years ago?" His entourage laughed on cue, following in Tyler's wake as he approached. The other patrons parted before them, creating an open path to where Chuck's Saturday Rosa moved protectively toward Chuck. But he gave her the slightest shake of his head, a silent message that he could handle this. She hesitated, then stepped back, though her hand drifted below the counter where she kept a baseball bat for emergencies. Tyler stopped a few feet from Chuck's stool, close enough to loom but not to touch. His posture radiated aggressive confidence, chest forward, chin lifted, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. "You know," Tyler said, his voice pitched to carry throughout the now silent bar, "I grew up watching your movies. All those high kicks and roundhouses." He mimicked an exaggerated karate chop, drawing snickers from his crew. "But I always wondered how much of that was real, and how much was Hollywood magic." Chuck closed his book carefully, marking his place with a worn leather bookmark. He set it on the counter and turned slightly on his stool to face Tyler directly. Still, he didn't speak. Tyler's smile faltered momentarily at the lack of response before reasserting itself with greater force. "No comment? Come on, Chuck. Everyone knows those movie fights are choreographed. Stunt doubles. Camera tricks." He leaned closer. "Not like what I do. Real fighting. Real consequences." Throughout the bar, phones appeared in hands. Camera lenses, aimed at the confrontation. The modern reflex of documentation this moment was being preserved would spread beyond these walls regardless of what happened next. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Chuck's silence persisted, but his eyes never left Tyler's face. The quiet stretched uncomfortably, and Tyler's crew shifted their weight, uncertain. "Hey," one of them said. "Maybe he's too old to hear you, thank you." This broke the tension with crude laughter. Tyler, emboldened again, stepped even closer. "Is that it, Chuck? Too old to engage? Or maybe you know the difference between what you did and what I do. Movie karate versus actual combat." He tapped the bruise above his eyebrow. "See this? Got it last night taking down a champion. Real blood. Real fight." Chuck's expression remained unchanged, but something shifted in his eyes, not anger, but a deepening focus, like a lens adjusting to bring a distant object into perfect clarity. "Shit! Maybe he's scared," another crew member suggested, generating more laughter. Old Joe's voice cut through the mockery from his table nearby. "Son, you have no idea what you're doing." Tyler's head whipped toward Joe. "Stay out of this, old man. This is between me and the legend here." He turned back to Chuck. "So what do you say, Chuck? Want to show these people if you've still got it? Or would you rather just sit there, hiding behind your, what is that? Tea? Jesus, not even a real drink." Rosa stepped forward then, her patience visibly fraying. "That's enough. You've had your fun. Leave him be." Tyler's eyes narrowed at the interruption. "I'm not talking to you, lady. I'm talking to Mr. Movie Star here." He looked back at Chuck. "Well, nothing to say?" Mariah, from behind the bar, couldn't contain herself any longer. "Maybe he's just not impressed," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A chorus of "ohs" rippled through the onlookers, and Tyler's face darkened. The mask of playful mockery slipped, revealing something harder underneath the ego bruised. The performer challenged. "Not impressed?" Tyler repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Fine. Let me give him something to be impressed by." In a sudden movement that startled those nearby, Tyler grabbed an empty glass from the bar and hurled it against the wall. The sound of shattering glass cut through the room like a gunshot. "How about now?" Tyler demanded, turning back to Chuck. "Impressed yet? Or do I need to show you what a real fighter looks like up close?" The challenge hung in the air, explicit now. Impossible to ignore. The roadhouse held its collective breath, the tension palpable as every eye fixed on Chuck Norris. Slowly, deliberately, Chuck placed both hands flat on the bar counter. His movements were unhurried, precise, a man operating on his own timescale, undisturbed by the chaos around him. He didn't immediately stand, didn't immediately respond. Instead, he took a last sip of his tea, set the mug down carefully, and only then did he meet Tyler's gaze again. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried effortlessly through the silent room. "You've made your point, son." Just those 5 words, neither acceptance nor rejection of the challenge. A simple acknowledgement that left Tyler momentarily off balance, uncertain whether he was being dismissed or engaged. Tyler recovered quickly, leaning in closer. "My point? No, I don't think you get my point, old man. My point is that guys like you movie stars playing at being tough, you've been fooling people long enough. It's time for them to see what a real fighter looks like." Chuck remained seated, his expression unchanged. "Is that what you are? A real fighter?" Something in the simplicity of the question, the calm way it was delivered, caused a ripple of tension through the watching crowd. It wasn't confrontational, wasn't angry, just a genuine inquiry that somehow carried more weight than any challenge could have. Tyler's face flushed. "You're damn right that's what I am. I've got the belt to prove it." Chuck nodded once, as if absorbing this information. "A belt proves you can win matches. It doesn't make you a fighter." The words landed like quiet thunder. Several onlookers exchanged glances, phones still recording, capturing every word of the exchange. Tyler's composure cracked further. "Stand up," he demanded, his voice harder now. "Stand up, and we'll see who the real fighter is." At the nearby tables, people began to edge back, sensing the shift from performance to genuine confrontation. Rosa's hand tightened around the baseball bat beneath the counter, her knuckles whitening. Chuck looked at Tyler for a long, measured moment. Then, with the same deliberate calm that characterized his every movement, he stood. He wasn't tall, perhaps an inch shorter than Tyler, but as he rose, something about his presence seemed to expand, filling more space than his physical form should occupy. It wasn't aggression or intimidation. It was simply presence. The kind of centered solidity that comes from decades of discipline. The bar fell impossibly quieter, breaths held, eyes wide. Tyler's entourage, so vocal moments before, stood frozen, suddenly uncertain. Mariah leaned close to a customer and whispered, just loud enough to be heard in the silent room, "He doesn't know what he's in for." Chuck stood facing Tyler, his posture neither defensive nor aggressive, simply balanced. His hands hung loosely at his sides, relaxed, yet ready. The space between them seemed charged with potential energy, like the air before lightning strikes. Tyler, momentarily caught off guard by Chuck's quiet confidence, recovered with a theatrical sweep of his arm, clearing more space in the center of the roadhouse. Tables scraped across the wooden floor as patrons hurriedly moved them aside, sensing what was coming. No one protested. No one tried to stop it. There was a collective understanding that this confrontation had its own momentum now, a gravity pulling everyone into its orbit. "Give us some room," Tyler called out, his voice pitched to carry. "Wouldn't want to damage any innocent bystanders when I teach the legend here about real fighting." His entourage spread out, forming a loose circle that defined the impromptu arena. Phones appeared in nearly every hand, recording lights glowing in the dim bar like fireflies. Whatever happened next would be preserved, shared, immortalized beyond these walls. Old Joe eased himself against the bar, arms crossed over his chest. Unlike the excited whispers passing between other onlookers, his expression held something closer to reverence, the look of a man who recognizes the weight of what he's about to witness. "This ain't gonna go how he thinks," Joe murmured to no one in particular, though those nearby heard and exchanged glances. Tyler was in full performance mode now, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet, rolling his shoulders, shaking out his hands. He circled Chuck, who remained motionless at the center of the cleared space, watching Tyler with the steady gaze of someone who had faced countless opponents and found none of them particularly unique. "Ground rules," Tyler announced, playing to the crowd. "I don't want to hurt an old-timer too badly. So how about this first clean hit wins?" He flashed a cocky grin at the onlookers. "Shouldn't take more than 10 seconds. Chuck didn't respond to the taunt. He simply adjusted his stance slightly, a subtle shift of weight that most wouldn't notice, but that transformed his ordinary posture into something rooted and immovable. Tyler's circles grew tighter, his movements more pronounced as he continued his pre-fight ritual. He jabbed at the air, threw sample combinations, half showmanship, half genuine warm-up. With each motion, his confidence seemed to swell, fed by the attention of the crowd and Chuck's continued silence. "You know," Tyler said, continuing to circle, "I always wondered if I'd get the chance to test myself against someone like you, to see if the legends measured up." He feinted a jab toward Chuck, stopping just short. Chuck didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. Guess tonight's my lucky night. From behind the bar, Mariah watched with narrowed eyes. This feels wrong, she whispered to Rosa, like watching someone walk into traffic. Rosa's expression was grim. Sometimes lessons can only be learned the hard way. Tyler completed another circuit around Chuck, who had yet to move from his spot at the center of the cleared space. The younger fighter's patience was visibly thinning, his movements becoming sharper, more aggressive. Come on, old man, he goaded. At least put your hands up. Give me something to work with here. Chuck finally spoke, his voice steady and clear in the tense silence. When you're ready. 3 simple words. Delivered without bravado or challenge, yet they seemed to echo through the roadhouse like a promise. Several onlookers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the calm certainty behind them. Tyler's expression flickered between confusion and irritation. This wasn't playing out as he'd envisioned. The legend was supposed to be intimidated, or at least riled up. Instead, Chuck stood there, with the imperturbable presence of a man who had seen all this before and found it unremarkable. When I'm ready? Tyler repeated, his voice hardening. I was born ready. He stopped circling and planted his feet, squaring up to Chuck. But if you're too scared to make the first move, I understand. Age before beauty. Right? A few nervous chuckles sounded from the crowd, but most watched in tense silence. The atmosphere had shifted from rowdy entertainment to something else, something weighted with anticipation and a growing sense that they were witnessing more than just a bar fight. Tyler's patience finally snapped. All right, Chuck. Let's see what you've got. He stepped forward with the smooth confidence of a professional. Closing the distance with practiced precision, his stance was textbook perfect. His hands raised in proper guard position. For all his bravado, he was approaching this with the seriousness of his training. A fighter who, beneath the ego and showmanship, respected the fundamentals of his craft. Chuck remained still, watching Tyler's approach with clear, focused eyes. He didn't raise his hands, didn't shift his weight, remained as he was, seemingly unprepared for the attack that was coming. Tyler launched his first combination, a probing jab, followed by a cross, quick but controlled, testing Chuck's reactions. The movements were fluid and precise. The product of thousands of hours of training. Chuck didn't block. He simply wasn't there when the punches arrived. With a movement so subtle it almost seemed like an optical illusion, he shifted slightly, allowing Tyler's jab to pass harmlessly by his cheek. The cross met empty air as Chuck tilted his upper body just enough to avoid contact. Tyler blinked in surprise but recovered quickly, following with a more aggressive combination, jab, cross, hook thrown with greater intent. Again, Chuck moved with minimal effort, each punch finding nothing but air. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Tyler's entourage exchanged uncertain glances. What the hell? One of them muttered. Tyler himself seemed momentarily confused, but his confidence reasserted itself. Dodging isn't fighting, he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. Let's see you throw something back. He pressed forward more aggressively, cutting off the space, throwing tighter combinations with real power behind them now. Each punch was technically sound, the kind that had felled opponents in the octagon. Yet each somehow failed to connect with its target, as Chuck moved with an economy of motion that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It wasn't flashy evasion, no dramatic ducks or spins, no wasted movement, just precise, minimal adjustments that always put him just beyond Tyler's reach, as if he could read the younger man's intentions before Tyler himself knew what he would do next. Frustration began to show on Tyler's face, his movements becoming less controlled, more forceful. His breathing quickened, not from exertion, but from growing anger. This wasn't the exhibition he'd planned, not the easy dominance he'd imagined demonstrating to his audience. "Stand still and fight," he growled, lunging forward with a powerful right hook. Chuck finally moved with purpose, stepping inside Tyler's guard with fluid precision. Before the younger fighter could react, Chuck had laid a hand, not a fist, but an open palm lightly on Tyler's chest, directly over his heart. The touch was gentle, almost courteous, but it carried an unmistakable message. I could end this whenever I choose. Tyler froze, his punch suspended mid-trajectory, his eyes widening in shock at how easily his defense had been penetrated. For a heartbeat, the two men stood in that tableau, Tyler with arm extended, Chuck with his palm resting lightly over the younger man's heart. The bar held its collective breath. Then Chuck stepped back, returning to his neutral stance, hands again at his sides. "That's one," he said quietly. Tyler's shock gave way to fury. "That wasn't a hit," he protested, his voice rising. "That doesn't count. It wasn't meant to hurt you," Chuck replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "But it was clean." Tyler's face flushed dark red. "Bullshit. This isn't tag. This is fighting." He rolled his shoulders, his movements becoming sharper, more aggressive. "Let me show you what a real hit feels like." He exploded forward with a fighter's speed, throwing a lightning-fast combination that would have impressed even the critics of his usual showboating style. Jab, cross, uppercut, hook, textbook perfect, delivered with the full force of his training and talent. Chuck moved like water flowing around stones. Each punch seemed destined to connect, yet somehow failed to find its target. It wasn't that Chuck was faster, it was that he seemed to understand the rhythm of the attack on a fundamental level, anticipating each move not with counter speed but with positioning and timing. The entire bar watched, mesmerized. Even those who had been recording lowered their phones, too caught up in the moment to remember documentation. Tyler's entourage stood slack-jawed, their earlier bravado replaced by stunned silence. "Jesus," one of them whispered. "What is this?" Tyler pressed his attack. Frustration, giving way to a kind of desperate determination. His technique began to suffer as he put more power into each swing, sacrificing form for force, control for aggression. His breathing became ragged, his movements less fluid. Chuck remained calm, his breathing steady, his movements economical. He wasn't performing for the crowd, wasn't playing to the cameras. He was simply responding to the situation with the practiced ease of someone who had made this his life's work. After a particularly wild swing that left him off balance, Tyler stumbled slightly. It was the smallest of openings, a moment of vulnerability that would have been imperceptible to most. But Chuck saw it. With a movement so swift and smooth it seemed almost casual, Chuck stepped forward and delivered a single, precise strike, a light tap with two fingers to Tyler's temple. "That's two," he said. The touch was gentle, yet it carried the unmistakable message that had it been delivered with intent, Tyler would have been unconscious on the floor. Tyler staggered back, his expression a mixture of disbelief and growing fear. For the first time, the reality of his situation seemed to penetrate the armor of his ego. He was outmatched, and not by a small margin. The bar had fallen into a hushed silence, so complete that the only sounds were Tyler's heavy breathing and the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye was fixed on the two men standing in the center of the improvised arena. "This isn't," Tyler began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "This isn't real fighting. This is some kind of trick." Chuck regarded him steadily, his expression neither triumphant nor mocking, simply present. "There are no tricks in real fighting, only fundamentals applied perfectly." He resumed his neutral stance, still making no move to attack, still offering Tyler the opportunity to continue or to walk away. Pride warred visibly with sense on Tyler's face. His earlier cockiness had evaporated, replaced by confusion and a dawning understanding that he had severely misjudged this encounter. But to back down now, in front of all these witnesses, with phones recording his every move. "One more," Tyler said, his voice strained but determined. "Best of 3. Chuck inclined his head slightly, not quite a nod, but an acknowledgement of Tyler's choice. Tyler took a deep breath, centering himself with the discipline that had, beneath all the showmanship, made him a champion. When he raised his hands again, his stance was more controlled, his focus sharper. Whatever else might be said about him, he was a professional fighter, capable of learning and adapting. "He doesn't know when to quit," Old Joe murmured from his position by the bar, "but at least he's finally taking it seriously." Mariah shook her head. Too late for that. Tyler approached more cautiously this time, his movements measured, his attacks probing rather than overwhelming. It was a smarter strategy, patient, tactical, but against Chuck's decades of experience, it merely prolonged the inevitable. For nearly a minute, they moved in a strange dance, Tyler attacking with increasingly desperate creativity, Chuck evading with calm efficiency. The younger man was clearly giving everything he had, pulling techniques from his entire repertoire. Yet he couldn't land a single clean hit. The watching crowd began to understand they weren't witnessing a fight so much as a demonstration, a living lesson in the difference between winning matches and mastering an art. Finally, Tyler overcommitted to a powerful right cross. In the split second of imbalance that followed, Chuck moved. It happened so quickly that many would later claim they'd missed it. One moment Tyler was lunging forward, the next he was frozen in place, Chuck's hand positioned precisely at the base of his throat, not gripping, not choking, simply resting there with unmistakable control. "And that's 3, Chuck said quietly. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then, with gentle finality, Chuck stepped back, lowering his hand and returning once more to his relaxed stance. Tyler stood motionless, his arms slowly dropping to his sides, his expression stunned. The reality of what had just happened seemed to wash over him in waves, first disbelief, then shock, then a kind of grudging comprehension. The bar remained silent, the audience caught in the gravity of the moment. Even Tyler's entourage seemed unable to process what they'd witnessed, their usual bravado abandoned in the face of such a clear and comprehensive demonstration. It was Rosa who broke the spell, stepping forward from behind the bar. "I think we're done here," she said, her voice firm, but not unkind. "Show's over, folks." The crowd remained frozen for a moment longer, caught between the spectacle they'd just witnessed and Rosa's gentle command. Then, slowly, the spell broke. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Phones were lowered, though not before saving the footage that would soon spread across social media. Tables were dragged back into position with scraping sounds that seemed jarringly ordinary after what had just transpired. Tyler stood motionless in the center of it all, his expression lost somewhere between humiliation and revelation. His crew approached cautiously, uncertain how to navigate this unexpected outcome. "Thank you, man. You good?" one of them ventured. Tyler didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Chuck, who had already turned away and was walking calmly back to his seat at the bar. The absence of gloating, of celebration, seemed to affect Tyler more deeply than any trash talk could have. "What?" Tyler finally managed, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "What just happened?" No one answered him. No one needed to. The lesson had been delivered, with more eloquence than words could manage. Chuck settled back onto his bar stool, reopening his book with the same unhurried precision that characterized his every movement. He didn't look up as Tyler and his entourage huddled in confused conference, their earlier bravado deflated like a punctured balloon. Old Joe approached Chuck, nodding respectfully. "Been a while since I've seen anything like that," he said. His weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Not since Saigon." 72. Chuck glanced up, recognition flickering in his eyes. "You were there?" 3rd Marine Division. Joe extended a hand, which Chuck clasped firmly. "Never thought I'd see you in action again. Some things you don't forget. Some things you don't need to," Chuck replied simply. Across the room, Tyler had finally recovered enough composure to move. His face was flushed with embarrassment, his earlier swagger replaced by stiff, uncomfortable movements. His crew hovered around him protectively, shooting glances toward Chuck that mixed resentment with reluctant respect. "Let's get out of here," Tyler muttered, already moving toward the door. But halfway there, he stopped. His shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. And then, to the surprise of everyone watching, he turned back. The bar quieted again as Tyler approached Chuck, his movements hesitant but purposeful. Chuck looked up from his book, meeting the younger man's eyes without expectation. Tyler stood before him, struggling visibly with what he wanted to say. Pride warred with honesty on his face. He began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "That wasn't what I expected." Chuck regarded him steadily. "It rarely is. 3 touches," Tyler said, gesturing vaguely. "You could have, but I didn't," Chuck interrupted gently. "That wasn't the point." "What was the point then?" The question emerged raw, genuine, perhaps the first wholly unperformed thing Tyler had said since entering the roadhouse. Chuck considered the question for a moment before answering. "The difference between looking strong and being strong," he said finally. "One needs an audience. The other doesn't." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Tyler stood motionless, absorbing them, his expression softening from defensiveness to something closer to understanding. Finally, he nodded once, a small gesture, but sincere. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, his crew trailing behind in confused silence. As the door swung shut behind them, the roadhouse seemed to collectively exhale. The ordinary sounds of the bar ice clinking in glasses, low conversations, the gentle thud of pool balls resumed with comforting normalcy. Mariah approached Chuck with a fresh mug of hot water and a new tea bag. "On the house," she said, her eyes bright with barely contained excitement. "That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen." Chuck accepted the tea with a small smile. "Just an old man trying to enjoy a quiet evening." "Right," Mariah laughed. "Just an ordinary night at Rosa's Roadhouse." But they both knew it wasn't. And as Chuck returned to his book, sipping his tea in contented silence, the story of what had transpired was already beginning to spread through text messages and social media posts, through excited phone calls and breathless recountings rippling outward from this small Texas bar into the wider world. The legend would grow in the telling, as legends do. But the truth at its center would remain unchanged. True strength doesn't boast. It simply is. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the Texas sun painting the horizon in strokes of orange and gold. Rosa's Roadhouse stood silent in the early light, its gravel parking lot empty, save for Rosa's old pickup truck and a single motorcycle parked near the entrance. Inside, Rosa moved methodically through her morning routine, counting the register, wiping down surfaces, preparing for the day ahead. The roadhouse wouldn't open for hours yet, but she'd always been an early riser. Mornings were her time for reflection, for putting the previous night in perspective before facing a new day. And what a night it had been. She paused in her work, leaning against the counter as she recalled the events that had unfolded in this very room just hours ago. The arrogant young champion, so certain of his superiority. Chuck Norris, a quiet presence until challenged. And then, Rosa shook her head in quiet amazement. She'd known Chuck for years, had served him countless cups of tea, had chatted with him about family and the changing seasons and the best way to grow tomatoes in the harsh Texas soil. Yet she'd never seen him in action before. Last night had never witnessed firsthand what lay beneath his humble exterior. The soft chime of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. She looked up, surprised. The closed sign was clearly visible, but people didn't always pay attention. "Sorry. We don't open until—" She stopped mid-sentence. Recognition dawning. "Well, I'll be damned." Tyler. The Titan Kane stood in the doorway, alone this time, dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt rather than the flashy attire of the previous night. His posture was different too, shoulders lowered, stance less aggressive, expression serious rather than performative. "Miss Delgado," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered. "Sorry to bother you. I know you're closed." Rosa studied him for a moment, weighing his sincerity, then nodded toward the bar. "Coffee's fresh. Have a seat." Tyler moved to the counter, settling onto a stool, not the one Chuck had occupied, she noted, but 2 spaces down. A small gesture of respect, perhaps unconscious. She poured him a mug of coffee and set it before him without comment. He wrapped his hands around it but didn't immediately drink. "I wanted to apologize," he said after a moment, his eyes fixed on the steaming liquid. "For last night. For how I acted in your place." Rosa raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Didn't expect to see you back here." Tyler managed a small, self-deprecating smile. "Didn't expect to come back. But—" He trailed off, searching for words. "I couldn't stop thinking about it. About what happened. About what he said." Rosa nodded, understanding. "Chuck has that effect on people." "Is he—" Tyler glanced around the empty bar. "Is he here?" "I thought maybe." "He's gone," Rosa said. "Left last night after you did. He doesn't stay in one place too long these days." Disappointment flickered across Tyler's face, quickly masked. "Right. Of course." He took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "I just thought I had some questions for him." "I bet you do," Rosa said, her tone not unkind. She studied the young fighter more carefully now. The bruise above his eyebrow had darkened overnight, the cut beneath it scabbing over. But there was another kind of mark on him this morning, less visible but more significant. A humbling. A crack in the armor of arrogance. "You know," she said, wiping down the counter with slow, deliberate movements, "Chuck's been coming here for years. Never causes trouble. Never asks for attention. Just sits, drinks his tea, reads his books." Tyler nodded, listening. "I asked him once why he chose this place. Know what he said?" Rosa paused in her work, remembering. "He said, 'It's the quietest bar in Texas. Not the fanciest. Not the most exclusive. The quietest.'" She shook her head slightly. "Took me a while to understand what he meant." Tyler was silent, contemplating this. After a moment, he asked, "What did he mean?" Rosa studied him, considering whether he was ready for the answer. Something in his expression, a new openness, perhaps convinced her. "He meant that true strength doesn't need noise," she said. doesn't need spotlights or cameras or people chanting your name. It exists in the quiet moments, when no one's watching. She tapped the counter for emphasis. That's what you saw last night. Not just technique or skill or experience, though Lord knows he has plenty of all three. You saw a lifetime of quiet discipline put into practice. Tyler absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. I've been fighting professionally for 6 years, he said finally. Won my first title 2 years ago. Last night was the first time I've ever felt. He searched for the right word. Outclassed. Not just beaten. Something more fundamental than that. Humbling can be a gift, Rosa offered. If you let it be. Tyler nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee mug. My whole career, I've been told to be louder, more controversial. To create drama, build my brand, get people talking. A touch of bitterness crept into his voice. My manager says people don't pay to watch fighters anymore, they pay to watch personalities. Maybe so, Rosa acknowledged. But at what cost? The question hung between them, weighty with implication. Tyler didn't immediately answer, seeming to turn it over in his mind. I keep thinking about those 3 touches, he said eventually. How easy it was for him. How gentle. He looked up, meeting Rosa's gaze directly for the first time. He could have hurt me. Knocked me out cold in front of everyone. But he didn't. That's not who he is, Rosa said simply. Who is he then? Tyler asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier bravado. I mean, I know the legend. The movies, the memes. But last night. He shook his head, still struggling to process the experience. Last night felt like meeting someone completely different. Rosa considered how to answer. Chuck would say he's just a man who spent his life trying to get better at something that matters to him, she said finally. Not for glory or money or fame, though he's had all 3, but because mastery itself has value. She refilled Tyler's coffee, without being asked, a gesture of hospitality that acknowledged his changing status from intruder to guest. The Chuck Norris you met last night is the real one. The quiet man who reads philosophy and drinks tea and treats everyone from celebrities to busboys exactly the same. And the guy who could take down a champion fighter without breaking a sweat, Tyler added, with a rueful smile that contained the first hint of genuine humor. That too, Rosa agreed, returning the smile. Though he wouldn't put it that way. Tyler fell silent, sipping his coffee and absorbing this new perspective. The morning light strengthened, streaming through the windows to cast long rectangles of gold across the wooden floor. From somewhere outside came the chirping of birds, the distant rumble of a passing truck, ordinary sounds that seemed to ground the extraordinary conversation taking place inside. What do I do with this? Tyler asked finally. The question was simple but profound. Not just about last night, but about the path forward, about what kind of man and fighter he wanted to become. Rosa regarded him thoughtfully. That's for you to decide, she said, but I suspect you already know the answer, or you wouldn't be here this morning. Tyler nodded slowly. Acceptance dawning in his expression. I have a rematch in 3 weeks, he said. Been telling everyone I'm going to destroy my opponent. He made air quotes around the word, distancing himself from the bombastic language. Been posting trash talk online, building the hype. And now? Rosa prompted. Now. Tyler took a deep breath. Now I'm thinking maybe I should spend less time talking about being the best, and more time actually becoming it. A small smile touched Rosa's lips. Sounds like you got the message after all. Tyler finished his coffee and stood, reaching for his wallet. Rosa waved him off. On the house, she said. Consider it a welcome to the roadhouse. The real way this time. Tyler thanked her, with a nod, that carried genuine respect. He turned to leave, then paused at the door, looking back. "If he comes back," he said, "would you tell him something for me?" "Sure. Tell him." Tyler paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tell him I'm working on the difference between looking strong and being strong." Rosa smiled. "I'll tell him, though something tells me he already knows." With a final nod, Tyler stepped out into the morning light, closing the door softly behind him. Rosa watched through the window as he walked to his car, not the flashy sports car he'd arrived in last night, she noted, but a modest sedan. His posture was different today. His movements more grounded. Not a complete transformation, such things took time, but the beginning of one. Perhaps. As she resumed her morning preparations, Rosa reflected on how many lives Chuck Norris had touched over the years. Often without saying more than a handful of words. His power lay not just in his physical abilities, impressive as they were, but in his capacity to reveal truth through action, to teach through example rather than preaching. That, she decided, was its own kind of strength. The kind that endures, long after physical prowess fades. The kind that changes lives, without demanding credit for the change. Outside, the Texas sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day. Inside Rosa's roadhouse, the ordinary morning routine continued, the space showing no signs of the extraordinary events it had witnessed just hours before. But something had shifted, something intangible yet undeniable. A lesson had been taught and received. A story had begun its journey into legend. And in the quiet aftermath, the true impact of what had transpired was only beginning to unfold. By early evening, Rosa's roadhouse had transformed once more. The quiet of the morning gave way to the familiar symphony of a Texas bar in full swing, clinking glasses, bursts of laughter, country music flowing from the jukebox, the rhythmic click of pool balls striking each other. Yet something about tonight felt different, charged with a subtle energy that hadn't been present before. Word had spread. The roadhouse was unusually crowded for a Friday, filled with curious locals and out-of-towners who'd heard rumors of last night's confrontation. Some came hoping for a repeat performance, others simply to stand in the space where it had happened. They ordered drinks and asked questions in hushed voices, glancing toward the end of the bar where Chuck Norris had Saturday. That seat remained conspicuously empty, though no reserved sign marked it. People simply knew, through some unspoken understanding, that it wasn't to be claimed. Behind the bar, Mariah worked at double speed, filling orders while fielding the same questions again and again. "No. He's not here tonight." "Yes. It really happened." "No. The fighter didn't land a single hit." 3 seconds? More like 3 touches." "I don't know when he's coming back." Rosa moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, delivering drinks and food, maintaining order, while observing the ripple effects of the previous night's events. She noticed old Joe and his friends at their usual table, surrounded by an unusually attentive audience, as Joe recounted the confrontation with veteran storytelling skill. And then Chuck just stood there, calm as still water, while this hotshot fighter circled him like a hungry wolf. Joe was saying, his weathered hands sketching the scene in the air. Didn't raise his hands, didn't take a stance, just watched him with those eyes that see everything and give away nothing. His listeners leaned forward, captivated. Among them were 2 young men Rosa recognized as amateur fighters from the local MMA gym, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and awe. Then the champion made his move fast as a striking snake. Combination perfect as you'd see in any title fight. But Chuck. Joe paused for dramatic effect. Chuck wasn't there. Moved like he knew where the punches would be before the fighter threw them. "That's not possible," one of the young fighters objected. "No one's that fast. Especially not at his age." Joe fixed the young man with a steady gaze. It wasn't about speed, son. It was about understanding. About seeing the intention before the action. He tapped his temple. Fighting's not just in the body. It's in the mind. And Chuck Norris has the mind of a true master. The skeptic fell silent, considering this. Rosa continued her rounds, passing by a table where a group of college students huddled around a phone, watching a video with the volume low. "Play it again," one of them urged. "Watch his footwork here." On the small screen, a shaky, dimly lit recording showed the confrontation from the previous night. Despite the poor quality, Chuck's calm precision was evident, as was Tyler's growing frustration. The clip ended with one of the three touches, the second one, Rosa noted, and the stunned reaction of the onlookers. "That's got like 500,000 views already," another student said. "And it's just one angle. There's at least 3 other videos from different positions. My cousin trains at Tyler Kane's gym," a young woman added. "Says Tyler canceled all his public appearances for the next week. Just wants to train. No media. No fans. No distractions." Rosa moved on, a small smile playing at her lips. The ripples were spreading farther than she'd imagined. At the far end of the bar, a tall man in a business suit waved her over. She didn't recognize him, not a regular, but something about his polished appearance and calculating gaze put her on guard. "Miss Delgado?" he asked as she approached. "Owner of this establishment?" She nodded, wary. "That's me. Alan Mercer." He offered a business card which she didn't immediately take. "I represent Apex Fight Promotions." Rosa raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "I'm interested in speaking with Mr. Norris," he said, his tone smoothly professional. "Our company would like to discuss potential opportunities arising from last night's demonstration." "Chuck's not here," Rosa replied flatly. "Yes, I can see that." Mercer's smile remained fixed. "But I understand. He's a regular patron. I'd like to leave my contact information for when he returns." Rosa studied the man, taking in his expensive watch, his manicured nails, the hungry gleam in his eyes that saw dollar signs where she saw a private moment that had become public through no fault of Chuck's. "What kind of opportunities?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Mercer's smile widened. "Exhibition matches. Perhaps. Commentary roles. There's significant public interest in seeing more of Mr. Norris in action, especially after the videos went viral. We believe this could be mutually beneficial." Rosa finally took his card, but only to place it deliberately on the bar counter. Face up. "Chuck doesn't do exhibitions," she said firmly, "and he didn't do what he did last night for publicity." "Nevertheless," Mercer persisted, "there's clear market demand. Surely, Mr. Norris would at least want to discuss." "What Chuck wants," Rosa interrupted, "is his privacy. And as long as he's in my establishment, that's what he'll get." She pushed the business card back toward Mercer with a single finger. "Thanks for your interest, but no thanks." Mercer's smile tightened, professionalism warring with annoyance. "At least pass along my information." He tried once more. "Let him make the decision." Rosa considered this, then nodded once. "I'll tell him you stopped by," she conceded, though they both knew the message would include her own assessment of his intentions. Mercer, recognizing this was the best offer he would get, gathered his card and finished his drink. "A pleasure meeting you, Miss Delgado," he said, standing to leave. "Should Mr. Norris change his mind, we're prepared to be quite generous." "I'll be sure to mention that too," Rosa replied, her tone making it clear what she thought of his definition of generosity. As Mercer navigated toward the exit, Mariah sidled up beside Rosa. "Vultures already circling," she observed. "Won't be the last." Rosa sighed. "Fame's a funny thing. Chuck spent decades trying to step back from it. And one quiet night in a bar throws him right back into the spotlight." "Think he knew that would happen?" Mariah asked, genuinely curious. "When he stood up to face that fighter?" Rosa considered the question. "I don't think he was thinking about consequences at all," she said finally. "He was just responding to what was in front of him. That's Chuck present in the moment, not calculating 3 moves ahead for personal gain. Unlike our friend in the suit," Mariah noted, watching Mercer's retreating form. "Unlike most people," Rosa corrected gently. The evening progressed, the roadhouse growing louder as more patrons arrived, drawn by the story that continued to spread. Rosa found herself thinking about the empty seat at the end of the bar, wondering if Chuck would return anytime soon, or if the unwanted attention would keep him away. Just after 9 o'clock, the front door opened, and a momentary hush fell over the crowd, every head turning expectantly. But it wasn't Chuck Norris who entered. It was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and familiar features who made her way directly to the bar. "Diana," Rosa greeted her. Surprised. Diana had left abruptly the previous night after Tyler's cruel comment. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." Diana managed a small smile. "Heard there was quite a show after I left." "That's one way to put it," Rosa acknowledged, pouring Diana's usual white wine without being asked. "Sorry about what happened. That fighter was out of line." Diana waved away the apology. "Not your fault. But—" her smile widened slightly. "I have to admit, I'm not sorry I missed the rest of his night." Both women shared a knowing look. A moment of quiet satisfaction at justice served. "I watched one of the videos," Diana continued, her voice lower. "Sent to me by 3 different friends. Couldn't believe it was the same man who sits here quietly with his tea." She shook her head in wonder. "All this time, and I never knew." "That's how Chuck prefers it," Rosa said, wiping down the counter. "The quiet, the anonymity, as much as he can get it." Diana nodded, sipping her wine thoughtfully. "Makes you wonder how many other people we pass every day, never knowing what they're capable of, what depths they contain." The observation hung between them, profound in its simplicity. Around them, the bar buzzed with energy people sharing stories, embellishing details, theorizing about what might happen next. But in that small space at the counter, a deeper truth was acknowledged. "He'll be back," Rosa said with quiet certainty. "Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But Chuck's not one to let other people's expectations dictate his actions. When the noise dies down, he'll return to his seat and his tea and his books." "And if the noise doesn't die down?" Diana asked. Rosa smiled, remembering Chuck's composed presence, his economy of movement, his ability to navigate chaos while maintaining his center. "Then he'll find a way to be himself anyway," she said. "That's what masters do." Later that night, as the crowd finally thinned and closing time approached, Rosa found herself standing in the space where the confrontation had occurred. The floor bore no mark, the air held no trace of the energies that had clashed there. Yet something lingered, not a physical remnant, but an echo of truth revealed. In that ordinary patch of wooden floor, arrogance had met its match in quiet competence. Showmanship had yielded to substance. And a lesson had been taught that would continue to resonate long after the last customer had left and the last glass had been washed and put away. Rosa glanced toward the empty seat at the end of the bar, a smile touching her lips. "Quietest bar in Texas," she murmured to herself. Not tonight, it wasn't. But she knew that wasn't what Chuck had meant. The quiet he sought wasn't about decibel levels, but about a deeper stillness, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for, regardless of who might be watching. That kind of quiet couldn't be disturbed by noise or crowds or viral videos. It was portable, self-contained, as much a part of Chuck Norris as his legendary skills. And that, Rosa reflected as she prepared to close up for the night, was perhaps the most important lesson of all. One that would be missed by the viral videos and excited retellings, but that had been demonstrated more clearly than any fighting technique. True strength carries its quiet with it, wherever it goes. 3 weeks passed. Summer yielded to autumn's first touch, and the viral moment at Rosa's Roadhouse faded from social media's spotlight. Yet, in the small Texas town, subtle changes lingered. At Rosa's, business remained stronger than usual, with visitors still hoping to glimpse the legend or simply stand where the confrontation occurred. The seat at the end of the bar, Chuck's seat, remained conspicuously empty most nights, though no sign reserved it. On this Wednesday evening in early October, the Roadhouse hummed with comfortable activity. Rosa worked efficiently behind the bar, serving drinks and making conversation. She'd spent weeks turning away fight promoters, reporters, and curiosity seekers, protecting Chuck's privacy as if it were sacred. As she served a beer to a passing trucker, Rosa's attention caught on the television in the corner. A sports channel showed a promotional segment for an MMA fight. And in tonight's main event, defending champion Tyler the Titan Kane returns after his controversial viral moment last month. Kane has been uncharacteristically quiet in the lead-up to this rematch, declining media appearances and limiting his usually colorful commentary. The screen showed Tyler at a press conference, dressed simply without his customary flash. His demeanor was transformed, focused, serious, professional. "I'm just here to fight," Tyler was saying. "My opponent deserves my respect and my full attention." When a reporter called out about the Chuck Norris incident, Tyler's expression flickered with something complex before he composed himself. "No comment," he said finally. "Some lessons are private, even when they happen in public." Rosa smiled slightly as she turned away. The ripples continued to spread. The front door opened, admitting the cool evening breeze and a single patron. Chuck Norris entered quietly, dressed as always in simple clothing: jeans, button-down shirt, well-worn boots. He moved with unhurried precision, his presence neither demanding attention nor avoiding it. Some patrons noticed his arrival, nudging companions and whispering. Others, newcomers unfamiliar with his significance, barely looked up. Chuck made his way to the bar, to the seat that had remained unofficially his. He settled onto it with a small nod to Rosa. "Evening, Rosa." "Chuck," she replied warmly. "Tea, please." She prepared it, the way he preferred, bag in first. Water not quite boiling. A small dish for the used bag. As she set the mug before him, she noticed the book he'd placed on the counter, the same one from the night of the confrontation. A bookmark indicating he was nearly finished. "Good read?" she asked, nodding toward it. Chuck's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Marcus Aurelius, Roman Emperor, wrote about duty, honor, and controlling what you can control." He touched the worn cover. "Worth revisiting from time to time. Been quiet without you," Rosa said, then amended with a small smile. "Well, quieter in the ways that matter." "Heard it was quite the opposite for a while." "Had all sorts coming through," she confirmed. "Fight promoters, reporters, fans, even Tyler Kane himself." The morning after, this caught Chuck's attention. He looked up, one eyebrow raised slightly. "Came alone," Rosa elaborated. "No entourage, no cameras. wanted to apologize for his behavior. She paused, seemed genuinely affected. Asked me to give you a message if you returned. Chuck waited patiently. Said to tell you he's working on the difference between looking strong and being strong. Chuck absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. After a moment, he nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, carrying neither pride nor dismissal, just quiet recognition of another's journey. Saw him on TV just now, Rosa continued. He's fighting tonight. Defending his title. Seems different. Less talk. More focus. Good, Chuck said simply. That's as it should be. They fell into comfortable silence, Chuck sipping his tea, Rosa attending to other customers. The roadhouse continued its evening rhythm around them, glasses clinking, conversations flowing, country music providing a gentle soundtrack. Later, Rosa turned her attention back to the television. The MMA fight was in progress, Tyler defending his title against a determined challenger. She turned up the volume slightly. On screen, Tyler moved with focused intensity, his style noticeably transformed. Gone was the showboating and mid-fight taunts. In their place was disciplined precision and economy of movement, a strategic patience entirely new to his approach. We're seeing a transformed Kane tonight, one commentator observed. Less flash, more substance. He's not trying to entertain, he's focused purely on effectiveness. Rosa glanced at Chuck, who was watching with quiet interest. His expression revealed nothing, but she sensed an awareness in him, a recognition of something significant unfolding. On screen, Tyler executed a perfectly timed combination that created an opening. Rather than immediately pressing with maximum aggression as he would have done before, he showed remarkable restraint, waiting for the perfect moment before delivering a precise strike that ended the match cleanly. The arena erupted in cheers. Tyler's celebration was subdued. No strutting, no taunting. He helped his opponent to his feet, exchanged a respectful embrace, and acknowledged the crowd with a simple raised hand. When interviewed, the question was predictable. Tyler? Many say your transformation began after your viral encounter with Chuck Norris. Would you say that experience changed your approach? Tyler considered carefully before answering. What happened that night taught me something important, he said finally. I've spent my career being the loudest voice in the room, thinking that was the same as being the strongest. It's not. He paused. True strength doesn't need to announce itself. It just is. That's what I'm working toward now. Rosa muted the television, turning to find Chuck watching with the same calm expression. But there was a subtle warmth in his eyes, not pride, but quiet satisfaction at witnessing growth. Looks like your lesson took root, Rosa observed. Chuck shook his head slightly. Not my lesson, he corrected gently. His own. All I did was show him a mirror that changed his life. He changed his own life, Chuck replied. The moment he chose to see clearly instead of seeing what he wanted to see. He sipped his tea. That's the harder path, the worthy one. As closing time approached, Rosa began her routine, wiping down the bar and tallying the register. Will you be around for a while? She asked Chuck as he prepared to leave. He considered the question, a small smile touching his lips. For a time, until the quiet calls again. Your seat will be waiting, she assured him, whenever you need it. Chuck placed payment for his tea on the counter. As he turned to leave, he paused. You know, I told you once I chose this place because it was the quietest bar in Texas. But that wasn't the whole truth. Rosa raised an eyebrow, curious. I chose it because places like this where ordinary people gather to share ordinary moments, they're where real life happens. Not in stadiums, or spotlights, or viral videos. His eyes crinkled slightly. The meaning is in the everyday, Rosa. Always has been. With that, he nodded farewell and walked toward the door. Every patron watched him go, some openly staring, others pretending not to notice. He acknowledged no one and everyone, carrying his quiet presence through the room like a steady flame. As the door closed behind him, Rosa stood for a moment in the settling silence. She knew the legend would continue to grow in Chuck's absence, embellished in retellings, exaggerated in memories. But the truth at its core would remain unchanged. That one night, in an ordinary roadhouse in Texas, true strength had revealed itself not through domination or spectacle, but through discipline, restraint, and the quiet certainty that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Outside, Chuck Norris looked up at the endless field of stars above him. He smiled slightly, not for cameras, not for an audience, but for himself alone. Then he drove away, leaving Rosa's roadhouse behind, taking with him the quiet that was not absence of noise but presence of peace. Behind him, the stories would continue. The viral videos would be watched millions more times. The curious would keep coming. But the essence of what had happened, the moment when arrogance met its match in quiet competence, would remain pure, untouched by the noise surrounding it. Like truth itself, it needed no amplification, no validation, no audience to make it real. It simply was. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.